If you haven't already heard, Brice Rubal was kicked from the CSM and given a lifetime ban from EVE for allegedly violating the non-disclosure agreement. This would be a BFD for most players, but it might be particularly distressing to Brice because of the potential impact on his professional career. Personally, I'm a big supporter of the guy, and I very much hope that this is all a big misunderstanding. I don't think that he was the best player on the CSM, nor the most knowledgeable, but he certainly was the best representative of the group. He maintained a strong presence on the forums, was highly accessible, and he actually tried to represent the interests of demographics other than his own. So, when it comes to community engagement and representation, this guy stood head and shoulders above the rest. Of course, if he did knowingly and willingly break the NDA, then CCP was right to ban him. Now, I am concerned about the strength of the evidence against him, but CCP is remaining tight-lipped. And since all I have is speculations upon other people's speculations, I'll leave my tinfoil at home today. Besides, I have bigger fish to fry. Critics of the CSM are pointing to the Brice Rubal scandal and claiming it as justification for the dissolution of the organization. While I do think that there is some merit to their criticisms, I completely disagree with their proposed course of action. Thus, I want to take this time to address criticisms and to discuss why the CSM is important. The first criticism is that it is non-representative, and call me crazy, but that's probably a valid complaint. Of course, how well the CSM represents the players is very important for two reasons. First, coming from a particular demographic gives them the knowledge and experience to understand how proposed changes might affect them. Second, while it is possible for people to care about the interests of other player groups and playstyles, it is in our nature to want to resolve competing interests by siding with our most salient in-group. It's just what we tend to do as humans. So, how do we fix this? First off, vote. You don't have to register, drive anywhere, or even put on pants. The hardest part is reading through everyone's platform. And I'll probably even address that. Either I'll make a video or a candidate cheat sheet in order to help you guys make informed voting decisions. Second, if you have any amount of influence, encourage others to vote. Third, if you're a wormholer, vote for low-sec candidates after voting for your own. And if you're a low-sec resident, do the inverse. Of course, I do believe that the CSM could use some restructuring, but in the meantime, this will help your chances of overcoming the strength of the null-sec voting bloc. Fourth, run better campaigns. Nullsec has a lot of members, and they're really good at getting out the vote. Thus, other candidates need to step up their game if they hope to compete. Start by reaching out to like-minded groups and let them know that you intend to represent your region or playstyle. Past that, regularly post to the forums or Reddit, and try to get on the talk shows if you can. In short, do your best to make sure that the people know who you are and what you stand for. Finally, it probably wouldn't be a terrible idea to have guaranteed seats for each region of space. Yes, I know the regions aren't homogeneous and that they are occupied by different people with different playstyles and priorities, but this would be a step in the right direction. And of course, if anyone can propose a better model, then let's go with that. Anyway, I was thinking of a model similar to the U.S. House of Representatives, except instead of being based on population, it would be based on votes. I know that sounds weird, but the simple fact of the matter is that HighSec has a bunch of new bros and casuals who just don't care that much about the CSM, and NullSec has a bunch of people who care a lot, and of course they currently dominate the body. Thus, if they're going to be receptive to any models which diminish their influence, it would probably be the ones that diminish their power the least. So check this out. Each region would be guaranteed 2 seats, with the final 2 being up for grabs for whoever has the most votes after all the seats have been filled. Candidates can only run for one particular region, and players can only vote in one region's election per Omega account. No proof of residency required. And I say that because I highly doubt that trying to establish residency will be worth the effort. Regardless, this system will probably result in a CSM that looks like the example in the bottom left corner. Once again, regions aren't homogeneous, so you'll probably still have various demographics complaining that they aren't being represented. But this is a huge step in the right direction. And of course, I'd be interested in hearing other people's suggestions. Just bear in mind that if it requires a lot more time and effort on CCP's part, then they probably aren't going to like it. Alright, players seem to exist on a spectrum when it comes to allegations of abuse. At one end, you have players that seem to think that corruption is the norm, while others merely believe that the potential for abuse outweighs the advantages. Needless to say, the idea that the CSM is only populated by the corrupt is absurd. Simply put, it's a logical fallacy known as a broad generalization. Just because some have abused their position doesn't mean everyone has, especially when most members have served without creating any scandals. Of course, this is not to imply that abuses don't occur. Moreover, I understand how it can be hard to see the good that the CSM does, especially when they aren't representing your particular interests. However, I adamantly assert that the good outweighs the bad and that the CSM is an institution worth preserving. Besides, arguing that the institution should be abolished because of a few bad actors is like arguing that social welfare programs should be abolished because of a relatively small percentage of scammers and freeloaders. No, this probably wasn't the first scandal, and it probably won't be the last. But that doesn't negate the good that the CSM does, especially when CCP discovers the problem and takes corrective action. But let's take a deeper dive into the benefits of the institution. First, the CSM is a group of players elected by players that influence the direction of the game. Yes, it is unfortunate that it doesn't represent the player base as a whole better, but this is an issue that can be corrected. Moreover, poor representation is better than no representation. Remember, these guys aren't just influencing things that only matter to them. Of course, their priorities might be different from yours, and they may want to go in a different direction, but a lot of the things that they influence benefit other player groups, if not the entire player base. To be fair, it's a little bit of a reductio ad absurdum, but advocating for the abolishment of the CSM is kind of like advocating against democracy because of a few scandals and the fact that you're a Democrat, but your district keeps electing Republicans. I mean, think about it. People are arguing to completely get rid of their elected representatives because they aren't doing as good as a job as they had hoped. Personally, I'd rather see them do a better job. Now, I'm sure that some people might say that the CSM is unnecessary because CCP can get feedback directly from the players. I mean, I don't know if you guys have spent any time on the forums, but I have, and I've noticed a few trends. First and foremost, threads often get derailed by arguments, which drowns out constructive feedback and drives people away. Second, the player base is quite diverse, and they'll often give conflicting feedback and suggestions. So, how do you know who to listen to? Well, you could go by likes, but the problem with that is that most people aren't going to read through the entirety of threads with hundreds or thousands of comments. Thus, the people who post first will get the loudest voice, while those who are late to the party, who like to think before they speak, will get far less eyes on their comments and subsequently far less likes. Take the Brisk Ball thread, for example. That one managed to rack up around 900 comments and 100 minutes of read time within the first 24 hours. Third, a big problem with forum feedback is one of selection bias. This may sound crazy, but some people would rather spend their free time in-game than arguing with a bunch of assholes in the darkest corner of the web. I know, I could hardly believe it myself, but it's true. Moreover, people are most likely to pipe up when they don't like something. In fact, that's something I know I'm guilty of, because if I'm happy with something, I'm busy playing the game, or making videos or whatnot, and not thinking about going to the forums to say job well done. Anyway, surveys are probably a better way to get player feedback, but they aren't perfect either. If you've ever taken a research methodology class, you know that designing good surveys take a lot of time and effort. And if you haven't, think back on surveys you have taken and try to remember if you've ever found a question to be unclear or that none of the responses adequately encapsulated how you felt. In fact, a big problem that I've had with the EVE surveys that I've taken is that I'm often ambivalent about a lot of topics, and none of the answer choices accurately reflect how I feel. In fact, let's use the CSM as a hypothetical example. I assert that it has a serious representation problem that needs to be addressed, but I'm also adamant that it is an institution worth preserving. So, how do I convey that on a survey with Likert scale responses and questions that don't specifically address my concerns? So yeah, that's a big problem with surveys. They shoehorn complex opinions and beliefs into a predefined set of responses that are easily quantified and analyzed. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Still, I would take a well-designed survey over forum feedback any day of the week. I mean, I'm not an animal. Finally, NDAs allow CCP to discuss sensitive information with the CSM, which can inform their opinions and allow them to weigh in on content earlier in the development pipeline. And that's an advantage that can't be replicated with surveys and forums. And it's a pretty important one too. I'm no game designer, but I do know as a content creator that the later a change comes, the more work is lost. In summation, The CSM gives us an important tool for shaping the direction of EVE. It's not perfect, but the good most certainly outweighs the bad. Naturally, the Brisker Ball scandal has damaged player and developer trust, but I would much rather use this as a catalyst for positive change than to see it become justification for the destruction of a mutually beneficial organization. Devs and players working together is a good thing. It gives devs a clear window into the opinions and priorities of players and gives them insight into how changes ultimately impact players and influence the meta in a complicated sandbox. And in exchange, players get to actually influence development of a game they care about. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a good deal to me. Of course, there is a representation problem that needs to be addressed. Hopefully, CCP will step in and make a correction, but in the meantime, players need to act. That begins by voting and making it clear to CCP that you want to see changes to the election process that results in better representation. I have no doubt that there are enough players out there wanting change to elicit a response from CCP. So, instead of arguing and saying that devs should be fired, maybe try having a civil discussion with reasonable requests. Also, real-life talk here. The only time your vote doesn't matter is when you don't use it. Politicians care about re-election above everything else, and the less secure their position is, the harder they have to work to earn the vote of moderates and of those on the fringes of the opposing party. Naturally, this pulls them away from the political extremes and towards the center. In short, vote. It gives you influence even when your preferred candidate loses.